Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Employee Relations and Public Safety Committee meeting today, June 21st, chaired by myself, Commissioner Ted Terry, also joined by committee members Steve Bradshaw and Jeff Rader, Commissioners Bradshaw and Rader. Thank y'all. And also see Commissioner Cochran Johnson. And of course, our COO is in attendance as always, never misses a meeting. You have a better attendance record than anybody. And then we'll get to Mr. Breedlove. You can take your video off for now, Mr. Breedlove. We'll get to you in just a little bit. All right, very good. Well, we have our agenda before us. Pretty straightforward. A little bit of a discussion at the end here that we should have time for. But let's start with our meeting minutes from the June 7th committee meeting. And if there's no changes or edits to that, I'll open the floor for a motion.
I move approval of the June 7th minutes.
Okay. All right. I think I saw Steve mouth second. Yep. All right. And then, all right. So no discussion. All in favor of accepting those meeting minutes, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right. So first up is the previously heard agenda item just from a few weeks back that I think we've discussed in pretty comprehensive detail, but I know we wanted to wait for any more revisions that might be coming our way from the law department. So at this time, I'll recognize Commissioner Cochran Johnson and any law department staff person or attorney that would like to speak as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Terry. I would say at this time, I will defer. I believe that we do have on the line with us today, Attorney Terry, who will go over the revisions that have been made for all individuals that meet the requirements. And also, Commissioner Terry, as chair, I'm going to forward to you because during our last conversation, there seemed to have been some questions as to why I chose to focus this legislation on our gas stations and convenience stores. And the data is here and creates a very overwhelming case for the choice and the decision. So I will send this along to you for dissemination to anyone who desires to have access to this data. But at this time, I would ask Mr. Terry Phillips to please lead the discussion.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Commissioner. The first significant change, and if it's okay, I will walk all of you through the changes from the original draft. The original draft, for your convenience, was dated February 14th, and you should now have a marked change copy, or at least a new draft that is dated June 9th, 2022.
Forgive the interruption. Has that draft already been sent to us?
I shared it with Commissioner Cochran Johnson. I don't know if she has shared it with the rest of you or not.
Well, that's my question. Has it been sent to the rest of us?
Commissioner, did you forward that or shall I forward it?
Please forward.
Okay.
And is it possible for you to, do you want to pull your screen up and we could just look at the version that get with the changes?
Yeah, I think that would be the best way since we haven't had a chance to review it ourselves. Go ahead and pull it up on the screen.
Okay. Yeah, can we do that?
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioners, this is my computer, so Mr. Phillips is going to need me to do that. If you will give me just a moment to actually
send it to Mr. Mikulski. He's always good at that.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so let's wait just a minute while we get the document up in front of the screen here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one on here now, but you need to put it on this one. So Frank is. June 10th, 9:53.
Yeah, that's what it shows up. So commissioners, what I have done is I have forwarded that to Mr. Metelsky, but I have also forwarded it to each member of the commission and Director Lumpkin and Chief Ramos. So you should have that. You would have a clean draft and a red line draft that should be coming up in your inbox in just a moment.
Thank you.
I've got a question. So is the expectation is that we're supposed to be taking action on this today? Because since I'm just receiving this now, I'm going to be very reluctant to do that.
Well, I think, yeah, let's go through it. And yeah, I mean, obviously, if we haven't looked at it yet, there might be some questions. So let's see how far we get. And if we still have some, tweaks or other questions, I'm sure we can defer it for another 2 weeks if we need to work that out. But I do see the email. So Mr. Metelsky, do you have it in front of you as well?
I am. Yes. Did you want to see the red line version or
Yes.
the other version? The red line. Okay. Give me one moment, please.
Thank you.
Having a bit of a challenge getting it to only one page. So let me see if I could do that while I'm showing it.
All right.
All right. Let's see. Whoops. Getting closer. Okay, where would you like me to be?
If you would go to page 2, Mr. Metelsky. Right there. Ma'am, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
The first significant change you'll find, commissioners, is in the definition section. Previously, what was marked high-risk business has been changed. It now reads monitored business. In your committee discussion, some of you expressed some concern about the connotations of calling it high risk. So we changed the name to monitored, simply more descriptive, hopefully not a negative connotation. The notion being that these are businesses that don't fit the general definition for this ordinance that would then be required to comply with it. And you see that written in the definition. That portion is not changed. At the bottom of this definition, you see additional crimes that were added, and those were added based on your previous discussion as well. Specifically, you see crimes involving firearms, human trafficking. Those were the 2 that were added. The last change in this section is where we have given a definition to occur. The notion is where certain things occur, including these crimes, a business could be required to comply with the ordinance and install video surveillance as required throughout for the rest of the businesses, the convenience stores.
So, Mr. Phillips, is the probable cause language under monitored that additional is in order to be able to monitor businesses where a conviction has not yet taken place. So there would be a probable cause finding, it'd be bound over to trial, and then it would come under this regulation. Is that how it works?
Yes, at the point that probable cause has been identified, that would be sufficient to require it here. And it would not be contingent on a full-blown conviction, which all of you, I'm sure, recognize that could take a significant amount of time. So here you would have an objective party looking at it. It's not a mere allegation, but once probable cause is shown, then that would be sufficient to require it.
Okay, so this is even before indictment?
It
This
could
is
be, yes.
basically the magistrate.
Yes,
Once you get to the magistrates, pass through the magistrate's court, then this comes into play. Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
And remember, commissioners, you'll see up at the top, that is only where we're talking about the crimes having occurred. If you look, we could be looking at an instance where we had 3 calls for police service within 30 days. So it's just trying to be consistent that where significant attention and appropriate means are there, we would make the requirement under this ordinance.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
And then just real quick on that one, Attorney Phillips. Do we need to include or consider some sort of time period after, a monitored business sort of reaches that threshold? Is there like a window of time to when, the ordinance would have to actually be implemented?
Well, the requirement would be made and they would have to, in the same timetable as other businesses, have to go in and establish it. Just
Okay,
like a new business, et cetera. Okay.
Okay, so that's in the ordinance, the sort of the time frame.
Yes, the timeframes are all in.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Oh, and then just real quick, so so when we say business, that basically means any entity with a business license.
Well, it's defined here. If you look at the top line, Commissioner, there, it is a retail establishment that is not a convenience store. And of course, that just broadens the scope of this. So it's non-convenience stores that may meet this requirement as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And the reason why I ask is, and I know this is really focused on, sort of the more like, a retail environment. I'm just thinking out loud here, but, the other sort of, maybe monitored, business might be an apartment complex. And,
Well,
I don't know if there's enough evidence, if there's not sort of enough of that happening at certain apartment, multifamily establishments, but.
Commissioner, I think the distinction here is we are taking a look at that question. Those are residential communities, which is, I think, a different analysis at this point in our process. So it's not contemplated here that residential would be included in that fashion. And I hope that explains what those terms mean as defined in this ordinance.
Yeah, it's different, but y'all are looking at that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So if we could look at page 3, Mr. Metelsky, I'll move to the next change. You see here, there's just a requirement so that we point to the entire code. It is just a careful belt and suspenders approach in changing the language there. The next significant change that will give that some context is on page 5, Mr. Metelsky. You see substantial changes here. And if you would go up just a little, I think that's enough. I'll discuss the top piece and then the bottom pieces after that. You see here under the VSS standards, that's the Video Surveillance System standards, really what amounts to 5 substantial changes. At the top, you see where the chief must publish the standards, and the chief is the police chief. And there is a comment where we will look for Commissioner Cochran Johnson to work with us as the sponsor of this legislation to speak with the clerk about some of the publishing. The next part that you see is about 4 lines down. There is a reference to section 18141F. And that is in chapter 18 where we have hotel motel regulations. And what this change does is make the video surveillance system requirements the same for both hotel, motel, and convenience stores and monitored businesses, so that we will have consistency in what our video surveillance system standards are. The next piece you'll see coming down is a requirement that every 3 years or so, IT and the police chief will review the standards and publish any new standards. It can happen more frequently. There's a requirement, at least every 3 years, they will review it. The new standards are to be published by February 1st, but they become effective on May the 1st. And for your convenience, what's written here in the legislation is that the governing authority would receive a copy 30 days prior to the publishing in February. So as a practical matter, this is crafted to say the police chief will work with IT for new standards every 3 years. They will send you those standards at the beginning of the year. They will then be published at the beginning of February, and they will take effect in May. That's the essence of, and a summary of, the changes you see in the large red section there at the top. That is section F. The
Good
next,
question.
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So once you've made your initial installation, is your existing installation grandfathered for any period of time, or is it subject to reinstallation every time this standard changes?
I understand that the new standards would be for those businesses that come in, but we can make a change if you think folks should not be grandfathered.
No, I think they probably ought to be grandfathered. I just wanted to make sure that they were grandfathered.
As currently crafted, I think it reads to give them grandfathering. The idea is, as technology improves, the new standards will be added.
Yeah, and I have no problem for new installations, but at some point, show me where they're grandfathered for the existing installation.
Okay.
Okay, and then can you just sort of expand upon that? So if someone already has a high def video surveillance system that is meeting all of these standards, they are grandfathered. But what about sort of just, maybe a run of the mill, sort of maybe cheaper version of a video surveillance system? Is that also grandfathered?
I think at a certain point, you have to have some minimum standards. The grandfathering at this point is for the beginning of this ordinance, but what we can do is take a look at how we would grandfather existing systems because of improvements, where every 3 years it will be reviewed, and what grandfathering will take place there, and put an express grandfathering clause in. And then the second piece would be, when and how often would you look for upgrades to existing systems to ensure that something that is excessively outdated is not listed? And I'm receiving your comments, commissioners, and just restating them to make sure we know exactly what you want the changes to be.
Yeah, you captured that right. That was what I was getting at. Okay.
May I continue? I think you have another commissioner's hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't. I have it partially blocked here. Yes, Commissioner Copper Johnson.
Yes, currently we have a 4 megapixel resolution that's required. I would caution us, as technology changes rapidly, to put language related to grandfathering in at this time, only because of the changes that in technology and the necessity for us as a governing body to work with an authority to make a logical recommendation on what is reasonable at the time we may review this ordinance. I'm just very cautious of that, because currently that's one of the reasons for this resolution, the ambiguity that exists in the field. There's a dead body, it's in the parking lot, but currently all you see is snow, because we do not have enough megapixels on the cameras to have high enough resolution. So I think that being reasonable and prudent every 3 years, as this comes up for review, it should be something that we have discussion on and speak with IT and other professionals to ensure that within a 3-year time frame, 4 megapixels remains the standard to capture the best possible footage that can help us in the apprehension of criminals. So thank you. I just wanted to make that statement.
Gotcha. Okay. And then basically what we're contemplating here is that the police chief and the director of innovation says director of innovation and information. Is that the Matowski's title? Or is it, I thought it was technology and innovation.
Yeah, innovation and technology.
Okay. But basically okay, so we make a little change there, but okay. So basically between the chief and then our director, our expert, Mr. Patowski, or other in future who knows about what the sort of the best standards are, those could be updated. Well, I guess they could be updated every year in theory, but a business that sort of entered into I guess when they were, I don't know if it's licensed or something for this new security system, that entity, their 3-year window would start when they start following the ordinance and install a new system. So I guess in theory, it could be every year, the standards could be updated. Am I reading that right?
In theory, it could be upgraded. The requirements is simply that it would be reviewed at least every 3 years.
Okay.
And if I may, I will go to the next section, which is monitored business, section G. It's just below it. That's it there. If you look through this section, there are really two things that are happening. The chief can designate a business as a monitored business, and it allows for removal over time. One of the things that came up in your previous discussion as a committee was figuring out how a business could get rid of the obligation to comply. In the definition, we spoke briefly about the things that could cause a business to be required to meet this. And we're talking about a retail business that is not a convenience store here when we're speaking of monitored business. Here, we're saying, you see the blank lines, those would be filled in based on a business decision, how long they would have to meet these standards and avoid repeating the things that cause them to be monitored so that they could get out from under the designation of monitored business. Those are business decisions for you to make. I trust you may want to consult your public safety officials about what an appropriate time would be. I will remind you from my notes that in your discussion, I think you mentioned a year or so.
Okay.
But whatever time you want, we will craft it the way you want it.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. Just something to throw out here, and then I'll recognize Commissioner Rader has hand up. So if a monitored business does install, the new video surveillance technology up to the standards, and then they show, I guess, maybe it's a year of sort of no major instances, or maybe less than 3, would the practical implications be that in theory they could uninstall all of the video equipment? I guess I'm trying to think of what the implications are if they're sort of not required anymore. It doesn't seem practical that they would uninstall everything, but would there be anything else that y'all would think would be sort of, I guess the incentive to not be a monitored business anymore? I'll go to Commissioner Cochran-Johnson and then back to Commissioner Rader if you had a question similar.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that, of course, politics is the art of compromise. And what we're doing right now is fleshing through what this legislation will look like. But I do want to point out to everyone that in order to be on this list, there's 3 consecutive calls within 30 days. Otherwise, there has been a murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, armed robbery, rape, child molestation, aggravated sodomy, aggravated battery, felony possession with the intent to distribute a controlled substance, or any crime involving the use of a firearm, or any crime involving human trafficking. So I struggle with, as the creator of the legislation, a guideline that would allow an individual who's had such an occurrence to come off of a list. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to ensure here is safety. And I would think that anyone who wants to do good business would at all times maintain a surveillance system. that is operative. So I want us to tread carefully. I yield to the majority and what the will of the board is, of commissioners as a body. But you don't make it on this list by being a saint. And it just, for us to say that once you have had this incident occur, that within a 1-year period or a 3-year period, it's no longer necessary for you to have video surveillance. I think video surveillance is something that should be integral and desired by each and every business that operates in DeKalb, particularly businesses that have had an incident of crime that's listed here that would place them in a monitored state. And that's just my comment.
Thank you. Yes, no, I mean, I would hope that a business would, endeavor to not be a quote unquote monitored business. Totally agree with that. Were there any other comments or questions on that point, Commissioner Rader?
I mean, I'm not a huge supporter of the surveillance state, but I'm less concerned about them getting off the list after they have gotten on it than I am about having to undertake a whole new installation coincident to a relocation or, positioning of a business. And so what I was more interested in them getting off of the list was if the business had moved to a different area or a different center or something like that. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the activity that you'll find in front of any particular business may be related to activity that's going on in other places in, say, a shopping center or something. So you may end up with being a monitored business because there is a liquor store next door and you run a laundromat or something like that. And whereas it may be necessary due to those circumstances to have that, if the liquor store moved or if the laundromat moved, maybe the laundromat doesn't need the surveillance because it no longer is associated with some other sort of triggering type of business. So I'm more concerned about being able to relocate and not have to undertake the expense of a surveillance system if the conditions that necessitated the surveillance system are not present at the new location, and if the business isn't intrinsically, characteristic of a monitored business. And I think actually that notion of a liquor store and a laundromat are maybe a pretty good, context to think about, because the liquor store may attract the wrong crowd and the laundromat may be easy to loiter at. But if the laundromat were in a different center without a liquor store, then the bad crowd wouldn't want to hang out at the laundromat.
Well, I totally agree with that point. And I would agree that that's something we should look into as well. But maybe to the larger point about a shopping center where businesses are simply tenants of a property, and while maybe their internal sort of video surveillance can be under their control, it does beg the question of a monitored business in a shopping center where their exterior might not be within their control. It might be up to whether it's their lease or, the shopping center management that, in essence has to, provide that security envelope, if any at all. And so I wonder, and I'm just thinking out loud here, because we don't, shopping centers, I guess they probably have to get a business license, right, to operate a shopping center. So in that regard, can a shopping center as a site, in essence, be considered a monitored business? Or is it necessary to maybe just add another distinction about just a retail, area that might have multiple businesses? Any thoughts there? Commissioner Cochran Johnson. Oh, you're muted.
Mute Commissioner John Carpenter.
I would say that as a general rule, and perhaps this is something, Attorney Phillips, that we do need to express so that it's not just understood independent of making the statement. As a general rule, most retail centers will maintain security. However, independent operations within a shopping center often maintain their own security system. That has been my experience, in terms of retail that I've done in leasing space. So if we are saying, but again, as a general rule, an incident may occur on property. I'll give an example of a BP station that's not far from my home, where a gentleman was killed in the parking lot near the gas pump. There's several different businesses there, but of course, the central location, or shall you say the anchor, was the BP station, and they maintain their own surveillance. So Attorney Phillips, do you understand the nature of the question and where it's coming from as to, in a retail center, who would bear the responsibility?
I do.
Okay. And as it's currently written, do you feel comfortable, or do you have any suggestions as to requiring that for the entire shopping center, that the leaseholder will make the adjustments, or would that fall upon the actual owner or management company?
I'm sorry, Commissioner. I understood Commissioner Terry's comments to be in the middle. What I understood him to raise was the question of how we get specificity in this document so that it's clear who's responsible and under what circumstances they're responsible. And what he raised as a hypothetical to address that question is what I would characterize as the typical strip mall, where you have multiple businesses, or any shared property with multiple businesses in it. And we can look at that and put some express language in to clarify it in the ways that satisfy you and the other commissioners. Did I get it right, Commissioner Terry?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Because I think, we're acknowledging that, like not following this ordinance could be the revocation of a license. I think that's that's the stick approach. And so I assume that the shopping center, I think is anyone planning on? I'm pretty sure shopping centers have to get a business license for their, property. So I guess I'm just looking for kind of that tie to where, yes, someone is in charge of this center, and there might be a lot of businesses. And I think, and this is probably where there's just like that distinction. I think we got to it in terms of sort of how we sort of designate a I guess business or property as being, sort of that monitored status. And so I think that's where there might be just an analysis, I assume, by the police department on, did the crime occur at this business, or was it just in the vicinity? And I can see there could be a little bit different approaches. Maybe the address on the crime report says one thing, but it really is more associated with that. So that's exactly right. Just a little bit, maybe more specificity, because I think, the intent is to make sure that if we know there's an area, right, where there's retail, and commerce happening, if there's, crimes, murders, human trafficking, the intent is we want to, promote additional security features to improve the overall environmental safety. So I think that's the goal, just, making sure we get to it in as kind of straight a line as possible. All right, thank you. Okay, any other? Yes,
just to summarize, where did we go if these businesses are in shopping centers? And is there a chance that the surveillance will fall on the center as a whole, or is the surveillance always going to fall on the individual businesses?
If I may, Commissioner Terry?
Yep.
Commissioner Rader, what I've understood from your discussion today is the current construct of the ordinance is such that it would be business specific. The chief of police would designate a business based on the criteria in the definition of the ordinance. 3 calls in a short period of time.
I understand.
One of the crimes. The key to that is that the chief would identify which business led to it. And that's the business that would get the designation of monitored business and then have to meet the requirement. What Commissioner Terry raised was a question where that may be gray, and asked really if we could add anything so that it is more clear with specificity on how that would be managed. If it wasn't certain which business was tied to or whatever the problem may be. I don't really want to answer a hypothet, but he raised the question where multiple businesses share a space, starting with the fact that they may not control the exterior of the building, the parking area. And where would they be required to put cameras? That's
Okay, so
inherent.
you're going to add some language that addresses that common area type of a dynamic.
That's what Commissioner Terry has asked. If we could
Okay.
add something
wanna
to
make sure.
clarify those points.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
And I was just
then-
summarizing for you. I thought that's what you wanted,
No,
Commissioner.
that's what I wanted to know. Yeah, okay, and you did that for me, okay. And then, the only other part then would be to just also think about how a business can change venues and not necessarily have to go for 3 months or a year or whatever without these incidents under whatever circumstances would be necessary if, they would be in a situation where the monitoring was related more to their prior circumstances than their new ones. I just, you'd hate to see somebody, again, that was a laundromat that moved to a different location, didn't need the monitoring, but because of our ordinance, it was required of them until they demonstrated that there wasn't the need for designation anymore. And maybe if they move, then perhaps they could be under some sort of, probationary period or something.
Okay, we'll look at that.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Commissioners, if I may, the only other changes are really just style. You'll see where written assessment is listed under the effective date. And then we capitalize county employee. Those are just style changes. I've given you the substantive changes. What I would point out to you, the bulk of your discussion today came around monitored businesses. You had, I believe it was Commissioners Larry Johnson and Marita Davis Johnson who had concerned about the term. So we changed to monitored and then being stuck with it indefinitely. So we've listed a space to get them out. And I've restated the questions and issues you've raised today for our consideration. And we'll certainly work with Commissioner Cochran Johnson to address those to her satisfaction before she brings it back to you. Are there any other questions for me, Commissioners?
I have one, just one, the last one, and then Commissioner Rader, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Have you done any industry review on this? I mean, we've had supposedly opportunity for extensive industry review on the small box retail. So have you invited review by folks from the Convenience Store Association?
I believe all of your statistical information will be discussed by the public safety officials who are working with Commissioner Cochran Johnson. And she mentioned that at the outset of this discussion.
So are you going to ask for feedback from the industry associations on this then? Or invite them to a public hearing or something like that?
It is not my intent to ask the Convenience Store Association, understanding that from the report that I've sent you, the convenience stores are the major issue that we're dealing with. I would think that it's reasonable and prudent and would behoove them to have video surveillance. And as the legislative body, it's our responsibility to protect goodwill and safety of the residents of DeKalb.
I'm not suggesting
as
we
a
ask
view-
if they want it or not, but instead if they have specific technical issues or other, relevant details that they might want to add to it, or would like us to discuss. I mean, again, the input that you got today were from lay people who have identified in this case of the common area type of dynamic. I mean, if I were a retailer or somebody from that group, I'd say, well, this is complicated by the fact that common areas are the responsibility of one party. And so my only point was not to ask them if they liked it or if they wanted it, but instead to ensure that they're not identifying any, workability issues that would prevent it from being effective were we to pass it without their review.
Understood. To the extent of engagement, we have had conversations with convenience store owners, and they expressed gratitude for guidelines because there were some who indicated they were unaware that a 4 megapixel would be better. So they had not given thought to upgrades in technology since the initial installation of the video surveillance systems that they currently have today. If it is the will of the Board of Commissioners that we hold public hearings related to the video surveillance legislation, then if that is the will of the body, that is what we will move forward with doing.
And again, that's not the only mechanism. I'm just suggesting perhaps there should be some consultation with some industry group who may have some deeper understanding of the business issues that may involve with businesses working within certain circumstances that, like I said, I had also raised the issue of lighting because lighting was part of this. And I know that, other stakeholders may be surprised and disappointed by a great increase in lighting that might be associated with some of the technology. And so I'm doing my best to represent or to think of those novel contingencies, but I'm not necessarily an expert. And I always find that those that are closest to it are the ones that know the business best.
And I think it does make sense to, I don't know if it's a public hearing, like in a technical sense, but more it's just like a meeting where we just sort of invite people to learn about the legislation and, provide comment. So I'd be open to, maybe committee members, if y'all want to do a evening meeting one night, we could do it for an hour and, talk about this once we're sort of ready for prime time. I think we're getting pretty close here. I think a lot of what's in there is really good. I did notice we changed on page 4, the convenience store shall retain the digital images for no less than 60 days, up from 30 days. I think that makes sense. I think the only other thing I was thinking about after reviewing this was the part that says, so under in page 2, section B, I guess, video surveillance requirements. It says request an inspection of new construction plans or a one-time initial inspection by their VSS by the director. Who's the director?
Department of Planning and Sustainability.
Yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, all right. Oh, there it is. Okay, director shall mean. Okay, thank you. So, okay. And then the only other thing is, I didn't see it quite. I may am missing it, but Chief Ramos was talking about a program where the police department can, I guess, tap into a video surveillance system in real time, like as it's happening. Is that captured in here?
What Chief Ramos spoke about is a mechanism that would allow businesses to voluntarily share real-time video. And it's not in the ordinance because what's in the ordinance would be a requirement. This could be used, what Chief Ramos spoke about, could be used by businesses to comply with the ordinance. It just wouldn't be required.
Understood. And from, I guess, maybe the techno geeks in the room here, all of the minimum standards, if implemented, in essence, would have the technological capability to voluntarily participate in that program?
What I understand, Commissioner, if I may, I'm certainly not a techno geek, if you will, but what I understand from listening to those who spoke about the program Chief Ramos described, as well as what's in this ordinance now, the requirements for the ordinance would dictate the functionality of your cameras and the like, and have minimum requirements for sharing video when requested by the county. And it would be public safety for law enforcement purposes. If they were to partner with the private entity Chief Ramos identified, it would allow them to meet those requirements. It's really a mechanism that allows them to have a shared feed and could feed public safety in real time. The cameras they use in the other parts of their video surveillance system would still be up to them, and the requirements in this ordinance must be met.
Okay. And so, all right. So I think that answers the question, because I think, I guess what I'm getting at is if a business says, yes, I do want to participate in that program, Chief Ramos, like, hook me in, sign me up. Everything that we're putting in place in terms of Wi-Fi networked cameras, the high definition, like, that should be enough for those. I guess what I'm getting at is would there be an additional cost or installation or something else they'd have to do to voluntarily, or is it simply a matter of we already have all the systems, all we have to do is, flip a switch and say, yeah, we're on that program now?
I understand the question. It is a private sector tool that is sold by a private company that folks would have to buy to supplement their system, and the county could then share it with them. It is another piece outside of the standard video surveillance system
So
that would facilitate the sharing.
Okay, so we do not currently have. Is Chief Ramos on?
I am.
Hey, Chief Ramos.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Very good. Thank you for joining us. So, so we don't have that system yet, but if we got it, then we could coordinate with the convenience stores and ask them to voluntarily join that program.
Yes, sir. And part of the program is that the company actually goes out to the businesses and solicits people to go ahead and sign up before it even gets up and running. So that's part of what they charge us for, but we will also do it as well. And obviously we will target those businesses that were interested in actually getting their feeds.
I see. Okay. So is there a plan to start working on creating that program for DeKalb businesses?
It absolutely is. And the law department was working diligently on it. However, UASI decided that they may want to sponsor us along with 2 other neighboring counties. And so we took a step back, and now they're working along with the company, and they may pay the first year for us. So we took a step back, because why not if they want to go ahead and cover the cost?
Understood. That's great. Okay, very good. And good. That's great news to hear. Do we know how long that would take to implement, or I guess for UASI to negotiate?
No, but I am going to follow up on it. And they did send an email today saying they're already in conversations with them.
Okay, cool. All right, very good. All right, I think that was all the other comments, questions. Commissioners, anything else that we need to work on or tweak based on what we're seeing here? Okay, seeing none. If there's any, obviously, I think if there's any more after, I think everyone can read it and digest it and look at the red lines. And so Commissioner Cochran-Johnson, or maybe Attorney Phillips, based on what we've given you today, is another 2-week deferral in order? Would that be enough time?
I would think that it is, but I will defer, of course, not understanding the load of the legal department, to Attorney Phillips.
Sure, Commissioner. We will try to get it done in the 2-week window.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that, public safety is top of minds for a lot of individuals, and including everyone here. So thank you for keeping it moving. And yeah, thanks Commissioner Cochran-Johnson for introducing it and getting us this far. And then, it's a team effort. Everyone's making it perfect. So this is good work. Yes, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson.
Yes, I did want to say that also within the course of the next 2 weeks, I do understand the desire for public input and comment. So I will be responsible for spearheading a town hall, and we can coordinate that together that invites all of our businesses as well as community to learn firsthand about the legislation as it's proposed and to hear any concerns and or general feedback that we may receive concerning the legislation.
Great, excellent. Okay, perfect. Let's definitely coordinate on that and make sure we get it out everywhere. That's really great news. All right, very good. All right, so I guess we'll open the floor for a motion for deferral.
Move to recommend deferral for 2 weeks.
Second.
Okay, motion second, seeing no discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Or raise your hand, whatever. Raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, deferred for 2 weeks. Okay, let's jump down a little bit and just take care of some of these contracting and other kind of more time-sensitive items. So let's go to item 1763, which is the resolution to adopt an amended and restated plan document for DeKalb County's 401A defined contribution plan. And Mr. Williams, do you want to take this one?
Mr. Jacobs can carry this discussion, but this is a continuation of the discussion that began with the adoption of this budget, increasing retention incentives for law enforcement and other key public safety personnel. Mr. Jacobs?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Williams. Good afternoon, commissioners. This is the enhancement to a current benefit that all employees currently enjoy. All employees receive a 3% contribution to their 401A account from the county, provided that they were hired after January 1, 2016. This enhancement would be, as the CEO mentioned, for public safety individuals only. It would be for sworn police officers, certified firefighters, and E911 call center employees. This would take the 3% contribution to the 401A plan for these individuals. It would take that contribution up to 6%. The annualized cost for this enhanced benefit for public safety is $716,000. We're approximating that amount. And this would be an ongoing benefit as long as they remain in that sworn and or certified position. We would like to offer a substitute on the BOC meeting date to change the go live date as proposed from July 1st to July 29th. That'll give our teams a little bit more time to more crisply and sharply identify the affected group, the affected or eligible group, and also gives us the additional time we need to test the payroll for this unique benefit for this unique group, and to make sure that it's properly included on their July 29th paycheck. The agenda item, I think as it reads today, says a go live date of July 1st. So we'd like to offer that substitute item to change that date to the 29th.
Okay, very good. And would the cost go down then, I guess, a little bit?
Only incrementally, Commissioner, by a relatively small amount, because it's only going to miss about 14 days of pay period. So that $713,000 would go down a very small fraction. And we'd be glad to adjust that cost on the agenda item as well.
Okay. And is this a one-time?
It's actually ongoing.
Okay. And so will you, I guess, project sort of the ongoing costs increase on an annual basis?
Yes, absolutely. We think coming out the gate, it'll be that $716,000, but as the county, if there is a big increase in hiring police and fire, of course, that number would go up accordingly. But we certainly have the ability to track that if there's a big uptick in hiring in these areas.
Okay. Commissioner Rader.
Is this going to be a vested benefit, or is it subject to rescission?
It is a vested benefit. Employees would have to work 3 years to vest in that benefit.
Well, no, what I actually mean is this the type that is vested insofar as we can't reconsider that level of contribution should finances necessitate it.
My understanding, Commissioner, is that the way that the agenda item is written does not necessarily lock the county into that benefit in perpetuity. Might be better answered by the law department, but
I want to just make sure that, because, I mean, if we change the pension, then, that is it's considered a contractual relationship with the employee. And I'd like to know whether or not we have the same obligations under this particular mechanism. I'd prefer otherwise, but I'd like to know it before I vote on it.
So I see Laura Johnson has weighed in. She wrote the agenda item for us, so I'd have to defer to the legal eagles for that.
Johnson, do you have a?
I do. The way the 401A plan is written, the governing authority can change the amount of employer contributions at any time. So if at some point later you wanted to increase or decrease the amount of those contributions going forward, you could.
Okay. And there's a distinction between that and for instance, the defined benefits part of the pension, right?
There is. This is not a defined, the 401A.
I know it is. I just wanted to ensure that there's a distinction between the way those two are written.
There is, from the inception of the 401A plan, which was not that long ago, the plan specified that the amount of employer contributions could be changed at any time. So that can be done.
Okay, thank you.
You, Commissioner Bradshaw?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Larry, remind me, you might have said this before, who all does this cover? Which?
Yes, Commissioner Bradshaw, that'll be sworn officers, certified firefighters, and E911 call center.
Okay, so it's the sworn police officers, certified firefighters, and what else? I'm sorry.
E911.
Okay. And you know offhand how many employees that is?
That's a good question, Commissioner. I thought that might come up. We looked at the group that was eligible for the governor's bonus as well as for the 6.25% increase. And if memory serves me correctly, I think we were looking at under 1,000 individuals, but I could certainly clear up that number with more specificity if needed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you discern what that is, just send all the committee members an email to that effect. That would be great.
Okay.
That's it for me. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Well, seeing no other questions, do we have a motion on this item?
Move to recommend approval.
Second.
All right. Motion is second. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. Okay, commissioners, we're running out of time here. I did want to make sure we get to the mental health legislative recap. So let's just do these two items if we can a little bit quicker. I think they're pretty self-explanatory, but if maybe Chief Ramos and CO Williams want to speak about 1691 and 1671. First, we'll do the body armor and related accessories. Purchase contract consists of purchase of body armor, concealable and covert tactical vest, armor plate, insert carriers, insert panels, and everything and all the above. Chief Ramos, go ahead.
So apparently one of the items that's on the contract is no longer available. And because the language wasn't included in the contract, we're just modifying it for that reason is what I've been advised. So no actual changes.
Oh, I see. Okay. So we're just sort of tweaking this contract. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Commissioners, any questions? Seeing none, I'll open the floor for motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and second. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. All right, and then the last one here is the 1671. That's the grant acceptance FY22 high intensity drug trafficking area grant of $276,156.
That is a yearly grant that we receive. It's assigned to the narcotics unit and it covers overtime and it covers equipment that they may need. And they work along with two other agents from, I believe it's DEA and the ATF.
Gotcha. And does some of that cover the like the little mobile fingerprint scanners?
It doesn't, but if we needed it, it probably could.
Okay. Okay. All right. Commissioners, any questions?
This is a federal grant, chief?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
This wasn't in the agenda packet. Is there anything that
Add it today.
describes the scope of the program?
I don't see much more than just says these funds will be used to pay overtime costs, services, supplies, and equipment for the operations of the.
Is there a enforcement strategy that we had to develop in order to?
No, sir. Because they call it a grant, but realistically, it's just an assignment. So we're part of a task force, and DeKalb County is the head of the task force. And like I said, they've been doing this for many years. It's a yearly grant, and it's HIDA stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. And so there's not a plan. So they have goals that they have to meet and objectives. And I believe this year's goal is to target and investigate 4 drug trafficking organizations, disrupt 4 drug trafficking organizations, dismantle 4 drug trafficking organizations, and intercept 2 drug loads. So that's the expected output for the year of 2023.
Okay. I would only say that, not that this is the case here, but it was HIDA, I think, that financed, the Red Dog squad in Atlanta that led to some unfortunate circumstances. So I just was wondering if there was, so what you described was what I had more of an interest in. So there's not like a special, no-knock squad or something like that.
No, sir. No, sir. It's very well monitored, and we get monthly evaluations from the unit. So we know exactly what you're doing. And no, that's not what they're doing, sir.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
It's more investigative.
Good, thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right. So no other questions. I'll open the floor for motion.
Move to recommend approval.
Second.
Okay. Motion is second. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. Okay, Mr. Breedlove and Ms. Jones, you can come onto the video here. We have till at about 3:30. Sorry to rush you, but if we run out of time and we need more to cover, we can certainly just keep it running the following 2 weeks. But if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourselves, and feel free to whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Jeff Breedlove here. I'm a person in long-term recovery. Uniquely, many of you know I used to have the privilege of being a staff member to a commissioner, and it's always a privilege to be back in front of you. Thank you for your leadership and the good work that y'all are doing. In the interest of time, I'm going to just give a very brief, uncharacteristically brief for me, overview of this, turn it over to Kim Jones. Kim is not only the executive director of NAMI Georgia, Kim also is an appointee to the Behavioral Health and Innovation Commission and served as a commission member in the workup from a commission perspective to House Bill 1013. And she continues her service on that commission. Briefly, HB 1013 originated with that Behavioral Health and Innovation Commission, which is in place since 2019. The governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, and chief justice make appointments to that. It is chaired by Kevin Tanner, a former member of the House of Representatives. They allowed a large number of advocates, and that's where Kim and I come in. We're part of the Mental Health Policy Partnership. That is a core group of over 14 of the largest advocacy groups in the state of Georgia, representing mental health and substance use disorder. We're very proud to tell you that we grew the coalition to over 54 members for this bill in particular, and that when the bill passed, it passed unanimously in both chambers of the General Assembly. And Governor Kemp suspended for 2 hours, day 40, and had a signing ceremony. Do want to give a moment of DeKalb connection to this in particular. It would be remiss of us not to acknowledge and thank DeKalb County's own Representative Mary Margaret Oliver, who was one of the principal forces. The bill was technically carried by Speaker Ralston, only his second bill, but practically it was carried by Representative Mary Margaret Oliver and Representative Todd Jones in the House. So thank you, DeKalb County, for sending us a solid leader for that. That's just some big picture. In the interest of time, I'm going to stop and ask Kim to go through the PowerPoint. And then if there's time at the end, if Kim misses any points, I'll chime back in. But please welcome Kim Jones.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, commissioners, for allowing us to be here today. And thank you for your interest in mental health. That means a lot to us who are out here doing the work every day. And again, I think you have a copy of these slides. If you don't, we can definitely share them again. But I'll go through them rather quickly, and I'd love to leave enough time at the end for us to answer any questions. The major part of House Bill, the Georgia Parity Act, was parity. And if you're unfamiliar with that, parity is looking at mental health and treating mental health the same way that we treat physical health as it relates to insurance companies. Also, as it relates to our CMOs, and CMOs are our care management, excuse me, organizations. That's our Medicaid, Medicare, Peach State, those kind of Care Source, those kind of organizations. This was the crux of our bill. And the most important part of this isn't just that we now have insurance companies that are enforcing a federal law that went in effect in 2008, looking and treating mental health the same way they do physical health, but the paradigm shift for our legislators and for the public to understand that the brain is connected to our body and that we are treating mental health the same way that we treat physical health. We included some definitions or some different aspects of parity that was enacted. I'm not going to read all of these for you. I think the major part of this that was most important to us as advocates was making sure that the generally accepted standards of care were determined by healthcare professionals and not insurance companies. And that was one of the biggest arguments or negotiating things that we had at the bottom. And we're very proud to say that Speaker Ralston stood by us to make sure that this parity law was written in a way that best served the people of Georgia and not insurance companies.
Could you just say what there's no parity? I didn't understand what the area where there's no parity.
When you say no parity for accident insurance benefit plans. So parity as a law wasn't included in accident and sickness insurance plans. You can still get those, and it's not required. Mental health isn't required in those. So there's no parity requirement for those two benefit plans.
Okay, so that's like cancer plans or ADD.
Correct. They're not subject to the federal parity law. Therefore, they're not subject to the law to enforce the federal parity law.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. These are the dates that parity is to be enacted. I will tell you going forward, implementation for this law is being tracked very carefully, not only by us as advocates, but also by the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission. It is a big part of what Chairman Tanner has included in this year's work. And these are just some dates to let you know when things will actually happen. We do anticipate that this law, although we're very proud of the work that it will happen, and we do believe that it will immediately help save lives, there are several things in here and all legislation that will take time. Another big aspect that was important in this bill was what we call the medical loss ratio, or as one of our legislators coined it, the medical spend ratio. That requires our CMOs, and we have them listed here, to spend federally 85% of the money that they receive from the state on actual services to the people they serve on behalf of their contracts with the state. And what we were finding in 2019, I think they served 83%, and that 2% difference is about $250 million that are services that did not go to the people we serve. So that was really important to us. In addition to, again, enforcing federal law, this law went into effect, I think, in 2017. This bill also allowed the Department, I'm trying to get all my acronyms out right, the Department of Community Health, DCH, to use the medical loss ratio in their upcoming contracts. So for example, the state of Florida has a 90% CMO spend ratio or medical loss ratio. And now a provider who maybe also does 85% in every other state in the Southeast. We are the lowest, just so we all know, here in Georgia of our medical loss ratio, but they can now use that in their contract. So a provider could say, hey, in the state of Georgia, I'll do a 90% medical loss ratio, which would put even more dollars into our Medicaid system or our CMO system. Workforce is a very important part to our mental health issues here in Georgia. If you're unfamiliar, we are ranked, depending on what survey you look at, 48th to 51st in access to care. And part of that problem was not having enough workforce in the state of Georgia. That was a result of parity, meaning we pay 68 cents on the dollar for care here in Georgia for mental health. So it is not an incentive for providers to be here. Actually, many of our healthcare beds are filled with people from out of state. So parity was real important to first address workforce. And then what we did here in this bill was to collect data that in the past licensed therapists and people could fill it out if they wanted to, but now they are forced to fill it out when they renew their license. So we have a good understanding of where licensed professionals sit across the state. It will also tell us what kind of insurance they're taking. And this is really important for equity to allow us to focus on what areas of the state we need to have more providers in and what areas of the state would help us broaden our equity reach across the state. The other thing was cancelable loans for people who go into our rural areas or areas of need based on the survey would be able to receive cancelable loan for their college and their credentials needed to provide mental health care. Also, in addition, the legislation extended the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission to 2025. It also put into some other kind of administrative things to allow for the Office of Health and Strategy to have more supervision of mental health in Georgia. Part of the feedback we've got from the Accenture report that was done, the consultants that the governor hired back last fall, was that there wasn't an overall body that was responsible for mental health and mental well-being. So there was some language put in there for that. Another important part of the bill, and let me say, this is not every part of the bill, these are kind of the important outcomes of it, was the assisted outpatient treatment. We do have assisted outpatient treatment here in the state of Georgia, but we did not have funding related to it. We did shore up some components of it to ensure civil liberties so that it was additional due processes and safeguards. But in addition, there were 5 grant programs that were funded out of this program to create a trial so that we can see how to make an assisted outpatient treatment program work in the future. Peace officer transport, which is one of the important things, especially to us here at NAMI, is diverting from criminalization of mental health. So this allows a peace officer to consult with the physician. Instead of arresting somebody, they can say, you know, I can obviously see this person is in a mental health crisis. They can consult with either on the phone, telehealth, however the local agency allows, but they do have to have some kind of consult and transport that person to care instead of having to wait until they commit a crime and arresting them and filling up our jail systems. Another important part of this was the MATCH program, and that is a program for children that forces state agencies to sit down at a table and formulate for solutions for complex and unmet needs of children. If you're unfamiliar, we house lots of children through DFACS with mental health problems in hotels right now at a large cost to the state of Georgia. And this will this was a program that used to be in effect a while back, and we just reinstituted. Also, another thing is looking at how we can have shared data. That's really important across agencies, not only for children, but for adults as well. And that is a priority for the upcoming year as well.
And Ms. Jones, let's pause here for a minute, and we're going to pause, I think, just because we're going to move on to the next committee meeting. But can you go back to that last slide with the transport of the peace officer can transport?
Sure.
And so I guess I'm just curious from y'all's perspective. So that's really great news that an officer doesn't have to arrest someone to, I guess, that's kind of a strange thing that I guess the legal authority to transport someone when they're not under arrest.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe the big question is where do they transport them to? And I assume in DeKalb, it would be the DeKalb Crisis Center.
Correct.
But we know that our crisis center is full almost all the time.
Right.
So can you just real quickly, and then we're gonna have to pause here, but I think the main thing I want to bring y'all back and maybe bring in Dan Baskerville, our lobbyist with Denton's, to talk a little bit more about the public safety sort of response to the mental health, issues in the community, and how some of the legislation, fits into that.
Yeah, it would depend on each agencies, and when I say agency, I'm talking about law agency, where they partnered with to transport people. It could be to a emergency room, especially if it's in an area, because this is for the whole state. So we do realize that there's a problem with that. And we do not think this is a silver bullet. There's many, and that's why the next, we're calling it the decade of mental health, and why the commission has been extended to 2025 to build the infrastructure to address issues that you just brought up.
Okay, wonderful. And then let me ask you one quick question, because I want to get more information about this commission, because it sounds like, so there's a statewide commission that is thinking about all of the multifaceted approaches to mental health. And Jeff, you can answer this too if you want, but does it make sense for, a county that also is interested in improving mental health services and sort of the complicated nature of addressing it in our society? Does it make sense for us to, in essence, try to create a similar localized, commission or resident sort of, input with organizations like ourselves that can help direct local policy?
I will comment on that, Mr. Chairman. So with two things, I would say yes. I would say not only should you replicate it at the local level, and in your case, you have Mary Margaret Oliver, who is just invaluable to you. You should know that the Chairman Tanner has made it very clear that they want any interested party, and that would include the board as an entity or individual members in your own capacity to ask to speak to the statewide commission and give the county perspective of, hey, as you're doing this, think about it from a county perspective. They desperately want a diversity of opinion and voices. So I would suggest that offline and at a future time, we could talk about how DeKalb could have its voice heard before the commission, but doing one in your own right, I think would be welcomed by the advocacy community and by your state peers. And just really, really quickly, that co-responder thing, y'all, when I was arrested in DeKalb, I say all across the state, I might as well say to you, that's the kind of scenario where if officers had this in play, that might have played out differently. Not that it should have in my case, but my point being is it does give an opportunity for a county or a city to divert a person from jail to become a statistic. It's not a get out of jail free card that hasn't harmed anybody or broken any other major laws. But instead of arresting somebody for loitering just to legally bring them in and give them a charge, now there are alternatives. And you're absolutely right. There's not time today to go into the wonderful thing that we're sitting on to save people from becoming a statistic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. So we'll coordinate about y'all coming back, whether it's 2 weeks, we'll figure out the schedule. I want to keep the presentation going and then come back and sort of talk about that idea a little bit more. So with that, I think, so we didn't get to one item, but we can definitely get to that next week. It's the resolution on acknowledging gun violence as a public health crisis. Certainly that's very important. So we'll make sure we come back to that first thing next committee meeting. But other than that, commissioners, let's take a motion for adjournment so we can do PWI.
So move.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you all.